The 1990s would be an incredibly important decade for the genre of metal. Although controversial before, this decade saw the genre become heavier and more controversial through the likes of bands like Cannibal Corpse and Mayhem. Bands like these remain in the forefront of discussion of metal in the 90s. However, I feel there's a band that doesn't get enough credit for their influence to the metal genre as a whole, combining Black Sabbath and Dark Throne influences with heavy riffs, gothic growl-style vocals, and controversial album art that included paintings from the serial killer John Wayne Gacy. Acid Bath had a career that, although short-lived and tragic, was incredibly important and memorable in the minds of hardcore metal fans. This is the story of Acid Bath. Acid Bath would form in 1991 and featured members from two previous bands. Guitarist Sammy Duet and bassist Audie Pitre were previously members of Dark Carnival, whilst vocalist Dax Riggs, guitarist Mike Sanchez and drummer Jimmy Kyle were from Golgotha. Golgotha was actually the original name for the band. This was however scrapped after the band members found out there was a band in Europe with the same name. They changed the name to Acid Bath, which comes from the British serial killer John Hay, who was commonly known as the Acid Bath Killer, as he would dispose of his victims' bodies in sulfuric acid before forging signatures to sell their belongings. This name change would begin the band's unusual habit of featuring serial killer references in their music and marketing. The band was based in southern New Orleans and would commonly base themselves around small towns within the area, including Houma, Thibodaux, Morgan City and Galliano. Acid Bath would record their first demo, Hymns of the Needle Freak, in 1993. This demo is incredibly hard to find online at this moment in time, which links to one of the main downsides of being an Acid Bath fan. More on that later. The demo would be so successful that it would earn them a deal with the independent label Rotten Records. On August 8, 1994, Acid Bath would release their debut record, When the Kite String Pops, under their new label. One of the things that remains iconic about this album is the cover art. The cover features a painting by the notorious serial killer John Wayne Gacy, who was commonly known as the Skull Clown. Gacy murdered 33 young men and was known as the Killer Clown due to his occupation and public persona before the murders were uncovered. The artwork used was painted by Gacy whilst he was on death row as punishment for his crimes. Obviously, the use of this artwork caused controversy. The president of Rotten Records, Ron Peterson, defended the use of the painting by saying, "This is America. You should be able to do what you want." It would seem that Rotten Records would have a lot to do with the use of this artwork, rather than Acid Bath itself, as Dax Riggs would reveal in an interview that him and the band hated the use of the artwork and were essentially forced to use it. The album would go on to sell 37,000 copies in the US, which is well above average for a band with no mainstream connection or publicity. Whether this is due to the controversial album cover or the music itself is unknown. Speaking of the music, let's dive into what matters for a bit. The album is said to be sludge metal, however was able to meld genres like no other band at the time. The album includes themes of sludge, doom, stoner rock, death metal, punk, grind thrash and emo, and was able to meld these genres together, creating a sound that completely suits the album cover. The riffs are at times heavy and Sabbath-esque, other times fast-paced and thrash influenced. The album often takes breaks from chaotic distortion with more slower-paced atmospheric songs. Dax Riggs' vocals are also worth mentioning, ranging from emo-influenced screeching to atmospheric and melodic singing. 2.5 decades later, this album remains a cult classic. 2 years later, the band would release their second and final full-length album, Pagan Terrorism Tactics. Following the trend of controversial album art, the cover would feature artwork from Jack Kevorkian. Kevorkian was a controversial proponent to euthanasia and assisted suicide. He would publicly champion the right to die for terminally ill patients, and is said to have assisted at least 130 patients in suicide. He was convicted of murder in 1999, however was released on parole in 2007 on the condition he would not offer advice about, participate in, or be present at any act of any type of euthanasia to any other person, as well as neither promote nor talk about the procedure of assisted suicide. When later interviewed about the choice of album art, Mike Sanchez would say, "The madness, chaos and romance of Ramirez and Gacy was a tasteful ingredient to throw into our American pie, made with Ziari's worst dios. Dr. Jack Kevorkian, featured on Pagan Terrorism Tactics, is part of what's going on inside. There are those who praise him for giving them their freedom. Then there are those who are on the outside, wanting your freedom to control. You would have thought this art would be an obvious choice as a follow-up for When the Kite String Pops. However, this wasn't actually their original choice for the artwork. Whilst in Mexico, the band would take a reverse negative photo of a decapitated animal head. This was originally intended to be the artwork before they decided on the Kevorkian artwork. The art would again cause controversy, as the album would originally be banned in Australia due to the use of the artwork. This has, however, since been lifted. Musically, the album leaned in a more melodic hard rock direction, however still featured a heavy dose of the sludgy heavy metal which characterised the majority of When the Kite String Pops. Lyrically, the album showcases Dax Riggs' poetic style of lyricism and further highlights his dark sense of humour. The song Pagan Love Song makes references to when the band was offered a deliriant called Angel's Trumpets on a beach in Florida. According to Riggs, the trip lasted for days. The lines "dying felt so goddamn good today" and "eating dead flowers, bleeding in a strange daze" refers to the band waking up delirious from the drug. The band would also implement black metal influences on the song 13 Fingers and New Corpse. This album would be unsuccessful in pushing the band to the mainstream and remained an underground classic. Although the band seemed to be going in the right direction, evolving and continuing to release music that pleased their cult following, Pagan Terrorism Tactics would be their last full-length album release. Towards the end of the band's tenure, Riggs would begin writing more acoustic and melodic songs that didn't fit with the band's original direction. This didn't interest the rest of the band at all. Creative disagreements would actually begin during the creation of their second album, as many of the ideas and vibes Riggs was presenting were being rejected by the band. Creatively, the band were coming to an end. Members became bored of playing the songs live. This, however, wouldn't stop the band from working on their third album, which was set to be named Killer Rat Poison. However, no professional recording would take place. The name of this album would be coined after a member would see a box of rat poison and say, "Just call it fucking rat poison." Acid Bath's last concert with its full original lineup would take place on December 14th, 1996 at Texas Billiards, which was a club owned by Pantera guitarist Dimebag Darrell. The band would end in tragedy, however, as on January 23rd, 1997, bassist Audie Petrie alongside his parents were killed by a drunk driver who had ran a stop sign. The accident left only one survivor, Audie's brother, Kelly Petrie. The drunk driver would be convicted of 3 counts of vehicular manslaughter. The death of Audie seemed to be the straw that broke the camel's back for the band, as Dax Riggs would reveal that Audie was the main person holding the band together. The band would attempt to perform shows without Audie, however, this wouldn't last for long as the band members were not comfortable with this. The remaining members would split off into other bands after this. Dax Riggs would float around in a few heavier bands before starting a solo career that would become far removed from his work with Acid Bath. Sammy Pierre would be a short-term member of Crowbar before forming Goat Tour. As we entered a new millennia, the internet became vital for the popularity and success of music. This has meant bands who prior to the use of the internet were underground or unsuccessful were able to have their music enjoyed by younger and more varied audiences. Acid Bath would still remain under the ownership of Rotten Records. This would prove detrimental for their popularity moving into the new millennia. If you were to look up Acid Bath prior to a few years ago, you would be presented with little to nothing apart from crappy bootlegs or poorly recorded re-uploads. Rotten Records are said to have a scorched earth policy on Acid Bath re-uploads on YouTube and will immediately take down any that are uploaded. The lack of online presence remained the same on Spotify, with their discography appearing only very recently. When asked about this, the label would say, "Spotify doesn't pay shit either, none of the streaming services do. When they do, we'll get on board. You can preview Acid Bath on iTunes." Luckily, in March 2020, the band's music would appear on Spotify and has since amassed millions of plays and a sizable listener base on the platform. Acid Bath would later admit that Rotten Records were a terrible company and voice their regret on signing with them. Considering all members at the time were financially stable and some with successful bands, it's a shame the record label limited the band's growth due to their personal greed and inability to accept change. In 2014, rumours would begin to spread regarding an Acid Bath reunion. This stemmed from Jimmy Kyle reaching out to vocalist Corey Taylor from Slipknot with the message which stated, "Acid Bath is in search of a vocalist. Please send MP3, demo, videos or any music links performing Acid Bath songs. These rumours were dismissed as other band members stated there is no Acid Bath without Audrey Petrie. Members Jimmy and Mike have mentioned that they are open to the idea of a tribute band, specifically for live shows. Any chance of new material is incredibly low. Dax Riggs has continued to deny he will ever perform or be a part of anything to do with Acid Bath again, hence why the message for the new vocalist was sent out. To this day, Acid Bath remain one of the most unique sounding bands to ever come out of metal. This has given them a cult following which spreads all around the globe. Due to their unique sound, the band have been incredibly influential. Well, I say influential, you would be incredibly hard pressed to find any band that sound like Acid Bath. The groundbreaking band remained mainly misunderstood at the time. However, these projects have transcended time. I want to end this video by imagining an alternate timeline. A timeline in which Acid Bath's career wasn't plagued by bad decisions and tragedy. A timeline in which the band members were able to work with each other on new ideas and continue to meld genres. A timeline in which they were signed to a label who supported them musically and allowed their music to be heard. A timeline in which the band weren't suddenly ripped apart by tragedy. I think the most impressive thing about Acid Bath is what they were able to achieve in such a short time with such a small audience behind them. Imagine how influential the band would be if they were able to continue innovating as they were before. Thanks for watching, guys. If you enjoyed this documentary and are interested in another artist whose influence is largely underrated and completely unique, make sure to check out my documentary on Lil B to see how one rapper who was mainly seen as a joke managed to completely change the landscape of hip hop forever. And if you enjoyed, make sure to like and subscribe, hit the bell and leave a comment to spread the story of Acid Bath all over YouTube.